One of the disadvantages of having written photo how-to for as long as I have is that your words often come back to haunt you. I started writing my first photo column in 1986 in Travel and Leisure. And during that time, I think I wrote something that said something like this: I don't think I'll ever use zoom lenses. They're just not up to the quality of primes. You know? And then 10 years later, my column was in National Geographic Traveler, and I think there I wrote, I'll switch to digital when they prime my F-100 from my cold, dead hands. And right after that, in Outdoor Photographer, where I'm currently writing, I think I wrote these lines that said, I'm not really interested in video because it takes a whole committee to do it right, and I prefer to work on my own. And I have come to swallow all those words. And I'm here today to share with you my little journey of the last 3 or 4 years, moving from stills to video. How many of you guys are shooting any video with your DSLRs or your mirrorless? So there's, okay, all right, that's getting better. Like last year, there would have been 2 hands up and everybody rushing for the restroom when this started. So what I'm going to do today is to just share with you some of the techniques that we as still photographers already know and have to learn when we're moving to video storytelling. You know, storytelling is the buzzword. We heard Moose use it, we heard Art use it, Susan, Dan, everything's about story. And I realized years and years ago that I always shot for story. I never shot for the individual image. To this day, if somebody comes to me and says, let's have an exhibit of your work, I have a heck of a time picking individual images because I'm always thinking in terms of story. Well, it turns out that video and story are made for each other. And there's a number of reasons why we as still shooters need to think about this new form. It's really just an extension of what we've been doing. But certainly if you're a young photographer or younger than me, which almost 99% of you, and you want to make a career in this business, you better learn this stuff. If you're an older person and you do it for your own pleasure, there's not that much pressure. But if you are wanting to remain solvent in this business in the 21st century, you have no choice. So let's just look a little and we'll introduce video by looking at what we call the highlight reel. You know, we photographers have our portfolios. We cinematographers, we have our reels. You know, so this is my reel from 2013. I haven't finished my 2014 reel yet. Sorry, we're old and slow, but here we go. Let's see if this. So there's a little year wrap-up of 2013. Now, why on earth would we want to go from this to this? Sometimes I ask myself that question, usually after taking my second Advil and, there after the back. It's the storytelling. It's the ability, after 30 years of working for editors like Dan and the folks at National Geographic, I kind of know what a story is, and I want to tell some of my own stories. And I realized as once they put that video, capability into the cameras, and I started playing with it, that we have the skills. But we just don't know it yet as still photographers. We know about composition. It's very important in video as well as stills. We know about light. We know about grabbing those moments, the guy tossing the fish or whatever it is. Susan just gave us a great lesson on working through to the moment. So we know when we recognize moments. We hopefully are getting an idea of storytelling photography, especially after this day, and we've seen some of the great visual storytellers of our time. And we know about pacing. We know all of this. It's innate in us as not only as still photographers, but also, as Sven said earlier today, the most visually literate kind of generation that ever walked the earth. We grew up on television and movies. We know visual storytelling. The problem that most of us have as still photographers when we segue over to video is that we want to just do big collections of stills. We don't want to, or kind of all-in-one, wrap-it-up kind of pictures. When I was a newspaper photographer right across the river in Union City, New Jersey, I spent 5 glorious years covering Hoboken, Hudson County, Jersey City. I was trained to get the whole story in one picture. The firemen rescuing the baby with the burning building in the background and everything, wrap it all up in one picture. Video, we have to do exactly the opposite. And so many of us run into this problem of trying to, when we segue from stills to video, of trying to tie it all up in one shot. What we want to do in video is break it down into a sequence. We have to overcome our tendency to want to get it all in one shot. It's about breaking down the process into pieces, not summing it up into one shot as we try to do in still shooting. It's called shooting sequences. To do so, we need to learn the 5 shots and the 5 angles, and we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the 5 angles. You guys know this. You know these angles because you watch movies and television all the time. What are the 5 angles? Well, there's the overall establishing shot. That scene setter that you need. Susan was walking you through in the previous presentation. She was walking you through, here's my overall, I'm getting in a little closer, here's my people. We do the same thing in video. Then there's the medium view, where you're kind of setting the scene, you're getting in a little closer. There's the close-up or the portrait, one face, 2 faces, that kind of thing. They call it a CU in short talk for the movie-making thing. There's the extreme close-up, a real tight detail that tells a story about a place. And there's a point of view shot, a point of view, what is the participant going after? And if you want to see how this kind of plays into visual storytelling, watch your favorite television drama with the sound turned down. You have to turn the sound down, otherwise you're going to get caught up in the story. So let's take like Law and Order, right? Okay, Law and Order, it's on 12 channels, 24 hours a day, all over the world. So you flip around long enough and you're going to get Law and Order. And there we have bump, bump, overall establishing shot of the New York skyline. Bump, bump, medium view, 5th Avenue, detectives Briscoe and Green walking down the street. Bump, bump, close up. Lenny says to his partner, it's a hot day, I want to get to the air-conditioned office today. Bump, bump, extreme close-up. There's a corpse with a knife in his neck right from there, right? Bump, bump, point of view from the corpse up to Lenny saying, I guess it's going to be a hot day in the streets today, and boom. In the first 13 seconds, you know what that story's about without even knowing, what the storyline is, without even hearing it. There is a visual language, a grammar to telling a story. So the 5 angles. And if you want to, as I said, watch your favorite TV show, turn the sound down, and just watch how they segue between them. We do the same thing in magazines. Magazines will start with a big, broad 2-page spread, big landscape, then it'll go into a portrait, then you'll see a close-up of a cup of coffee with some food, and then it'll pull back to a medium shot of a street scene. We do it in print, but we also do it in movie work and video work. Now, we have the 5 angles. What do we put in those angles? And this is really breaking it down kind of simplistically because there's more than this, but we talk about the 5 shots. What are the 5 shots? A close-up of the action, a close-up of the reaction to the action or who is conducting the action, and we'll see examples of this. A point of view shot by the person conducting the action, a shot establishing where the action is taking place, and a creative beauty shot that ties into the action. So let's say we're going to do a film about the last shoemaker on 9th Avenue. And we go into his shop, and there's little Geppetto, you know, and he's banging on the shoe, so we get a close-up. We start off with a close-up of Geppetto's hands knocking the sole in. Then we go up to his characteristic face looking down. We do a tight shot of the face. Then we pull back a little. We see we go over his shoulder, and we shoot from Geppetto's point of view, seeing his hands there. Then we pull back, we see him in the shot. Then we pull back and we shoot through the window, and we show a creative shot of Geppetto with the people walking through. And then we shoot about 10 more close-ups. One thing I've learned in video, you can't be too rich, too thin, or have too many close-ups when you're editing. Close-ups are really, really important. So let's take a look. When you've covered the 5 shots of an action using more than one of the 5 angles, you've created a sequence, what we call a sequence, what an editor might call a sequence. Now I'm going to show you a typical sequence. It's from a video. I do some work for some nonprofits in inner city Camden and Trenton down in New Jersey. And this is from a music camp that this nonprofit runs. And this is an older kid giving a younger kid a music lesson. It's about 30 seconds. And just think of it in terms of sequences. It's 2 kids sitting in a classroom taking a saxophone lesson. But look how it's broken down by those shots.
Seeing Alexander Cummings play after he had been at Oberlin for 2 years now. He's going into his junior year. And I remember starting Alex when he was a little kid, little long-armed kid walking in the band room. He's a testament to, you know, what it is you can do after hard work. And after hard work, you will be rewarded. You know, after he's traveled to China, performed with Stevie Wonder, he took time out to pay it forward and come back to the camp this summer and work with the kids.
So you see, we don't just hang on the 2 kids together. We go 2 kids together, Alex's face, kid's face, Alex's hands, kid's hands. I didn't get a chance to go around and do the point of view shot, but that's the way we sequence. We have to sequence our vision. We can't wrap it all up in one shot and just hold that shot for 15 seconds because we'll lose our viewers entirely. The importance of close-ups cannot be overemphasized for those of us still shooters. I was the worst macro close-up shooter in the world. I used to go off on travel assignments, and my wife Peggy would edit my stock after Dan was through with it, and she kept saying, "Where are the close-ups? Where are the close-ups?" I said, "I don't have time to shoot close-ups. I'm after the big, more important things." Well, close-ups in video are as vital as air to us to breathe. You need close-ups to move from one sequence to another sequence. So you cannot avoid shooting close-ups. You need them because when you move from one scene to another without some kind of a sequence or a vision, you get what's called the jump cut. A jump cut is when you move from a framing that looks like this to a similar framing without you know, it jars the eye. We know it's a mistake. Sometimes the mistake can be used, like any mistake in photography, for an effect, but usually you want to avoid the jump cut. So what would you do if you wanted to move between these 2 framings? You would go down, the editor would make a transition, you know, you'd shoot the frame, you'd go to the close-up of the lady, close-up of the baby, and then you go back to the other shot. So jump cuts are to be avoided, and close-ups help that way. Another thing that we still shooters have trouble with is showing the passage of time, because we're trained to track the action, right? If there's some horses running by there, we're going to do this. And when that happens with video, we get into what's called fire hosing. You ever start shooting video and you're like, whoa, whoa, here we go. You know, break out the Dramamine, you know. One of the things that we have to learn to do is let things pass through our frame. Let the action move through the frame and don't track it. Try not to fire hose, because action entering and leaving a frame is a good place to cut and edit, and it infers the passage of time. So we let the subject enter and leave the frame for a natural movement of time. We use close-ups or cutaways to move from one scene to the next to avoid jump cutting. So a couple of things to observe in the following clip about action moving and passage of time. The action keeps moving in the same direction. In this case, it's going to be right to left. It should be left to right, but I'm a rookie. What can I tell you? Subject enters and leaves the frame several times. Sometimes we use dissolves instead of hard cuts to indicate the passage of time. And we cut on the action. When you're cutting from one shot to another, the action of opening a door or something is where you cut. So let's just watch. This is from a little piece I did on a guy down in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I live, who took the entire contents of a Broadway costume house and moved it into a barn down there, and he supplies all the costumes for all the kids' shows down in Bucks County, and he's a delightful old guy, and he lives right next to his barn, and it's like going into Middle Earth to deal with him. But here he's telling the story of how he got involved.
Had no children, and so they sort of adopted me with my mother's permission. I had two mothers. And when Mr. Cargill passed away in 1986, he left the company to Mrs. Cargill and to myself. She and I ran it for another 7 years. She passed away the same day he did, 7 years later, and she left the company to me. I searched for a place to relocate, and
so he comes in and out of the frame several times. When he comes from the outside to the inside, we cut on the action, and that's how we indicate the passage of time. So these are some of the main points that we photographers have trouble with. It's breaking it down into sequences, letting action move in and out of the frame. You don't have to follow everything all the time. You can let people move in and out of the frame, and this business of cutting on the action. So a couple other technical things that we have to talk about when we go from stills to video is frame rates. 24 frames per second is the standard for movies and cinema. It was the slowest rate that you could flash past the human eye and still have it look like continuous motion. So back in the days when the silent films were invented, they didn't want to use too much film, so they determined after much experimentation that 24 frames per second was the fewest frames that they could use and still have action look like it was continuous and not flashing frames. So people have been trying to save film from the beginning, you know. I mean, it was strictly a money thing to save frames. So, but that look has come to be associated with cinema, with movies, as opposed to video broadcast. 30 frames per second is a video standard. 60 frames per second is another video standard. And this is when things start to look like TV news. You know the difference between a video look and a cinema look. Back in the days when British TV was still kind of in their post-war stage, you notice that they do their interior stuff on film, but the minute you went outside in a British TV show, it was video, and it was like, whoa, it just looks so different. It could really disorient you. And here's another little tough thing that we have to live with. Your shutter speed should always be approximately 2 times the frame rate. So that means if you're shooting 24 frames per second, a 50th of a second is your shutter speed. Imagine a world where there's only one shutter speed. This is a nightmare for us. When it's bright and we want to get narrow depth of field, what do? 50th of a second is pretty moderate. If it's dark, 50th of a second isn't going to do it. So we've got to compensate for it. And the reason we do this is because there should be just a little subject movement in each frame for it to look natural when it plays together. And they've determined after all these years that twice, it's called the global shutter, twice the frame rate is about what looks natural to the human eye. 24 frames per second will give your stuff the cinematic look. You shoot it at a 50th or a 48th of a second if you have that setting. 60 frames per second is great to shoot slow motion. When you retime it to 24 frames per second in a timeline, the extra frames make the slow motion look very smooth. It's called overcrank. You're shooting at higher frame rates to lower it down. So you have to shoot 60 frames per second at 125th of a second, or faster for moving subjects. If you remember the opening of Saving Private Ryan, you remember that beach sequence where they're hitting the beach and it's like blood and guts and everything's flying everywhere? Spielberg shot that at a 6/40th and a 1,000th of a second, and it has this kind of hyper reality because there's no blur in the frames, and he used it to great effect there. Anybody who's ever seen that film will never forget the opening. So let's talk a little about slow motion. It's one of the most powerful tools in the cinematographer's arsenal. It's usually achieved by overcranking, shooting at a higher frame rate, and playing at a slower frame rate. 60 frames per second is great to shoot for slow motion. When you retime it to 24, the extra frames make it look buttery smooth. So here's 60 frames per second played at 60 frames. And so it looks a little like video, but here it is being played in slow-mo at 24 frames per second. So it has that nice, buttery, smooth slow-mo. Now, slow-mo can be used in a very interpretive way, and I'm just looking at the next slide that's coming up here, and this is really sad because I was in Bhaktapur right outside of Kathmandu about 6 weeks ago. And I shot a little 2-minute piece that I'm going to show you entirely in slow motion of an afternoon and evening in Bhaktapur. This place is not recognizable anymore. It's kind of sad, but here, this is what it once was, and we'll just look at how slow-mo can be used. Let's start this baby. So it's a very evocative thing, and it's kind of sad when you look at it because most of those buildings and maybe some of those people are gone. Doctors Without Borders, my favorite charity. That's who I sent my money to for work over there. But a beautiful town, and hopefully they'll rebuild it sometime. But you can see how that slow-mo just kind of really helps you add a mood and makes things a little more evocative. So it's a very, very important tool in our toolbox. Controlling exposure is weird for us. It's weird. We have one shutter speed. Can you imagine? It's like having a broken camera. We have only 2/3 of the usual exposure control triangle, aperture and ISO, because we're stuck with that one shutter speed. In a 24 frame per second movie, stay as close to a 50th as you can. But what if you want to shoot, say, at f1.8 for sexy bokeh on a bright sunny day? Even at ISO 100, you're down at f8 if you're shooting at a 50th of a second. Well, that's where you have to use the filters, yes. Neutral density filters, usually a variable neutral density filter, but you can use straight ones too. Because this is the way we're going to further control the light coming into our camera, because we cannot change that shutter speed. So outdoors, we use a variable neutral density filter to control our exposure. Indoors, when we hit the ceiling of 1/50th at 1/8, f1.8, and we still need to go lower, we use ISO to control exposure. You still need the 50th of a second. Let's say you want to shoot at f1.8 for narrow depth of field or in low light. Indoors, it's a matter of setting those two parameters and using the ISO to dial in the exposure. It's important to know how high you can go in ISO before it starts looking terrible. 1600 doesn't seem to be a problem for most cameras. In some cameras, like the Sony a7S, extremely high ISOs, up to 25,600 and beyond, are capable with relatively no noise. I shoot most of my work with a Sony RX10, the little pocket it's that hybrid camera. It's an unbelievably versatile camera. But I also have the A7S, and I just was working on a documentary shoot up in Iceland where I was able to shoot in a shepherd's hut by the light of one candle at ISO 25,600, and it looks like I lit the whole place with like candles and stuff. It's just amazing. If we had this technology 30 years ago, I can only imagine the pictures I could have taken, but you can't dwell on the pictures that you've missed. You can only think about the pictures you're going to get. So we use ISO inside. We use those variable neutral densities outdoors. Now, another thing that we photographers have trouble with is the importance of audio, because isn't the visual world the most important? It turns out, no. It turns out that if you put a thing on YouTube that was shot with your iPhone with Vaseline smeared on it and stuff, and it shows a cute baby, putting a kitten into a shoe, you'll get and it has decent audio, you'll get 1 million views. But if you do the same thing and you got terrible scratchy audio and you shoot it with a red Alexa, nobody will watch it. So audio is really, really important. People will tolerate lousy visuals, but not lousy audio. You can geek out on audio just like photography, but basic good practices with basic gear will get you in the ballpark. So what are the audio basics here? Signal to noise ratio, the loudness of the subject versus the noise floor of the mic. You want to get your mic as close to the source of the sound as possible. Good mics will have very low noise floors. They won't hiss. One of the problems when we first switched over to video with our DSLRs, our mics had terrible hissing. They're getting better, but they still could get improve even more. We want to get the mics close, and we want to protect them from wind and plosives. We want to watch that kind of sound. For most of us, using a small shotgun mic right into the camera will be fine for natural sound. And natural sound are those incidental sounds that we get while we're recording, the sound of people opening candy wrappers, the sound of somebody's cell phone going off, that kind of thing. For interviews and music, we can either use an audio recorder, a real camcorder with decent audio floors, or a preamp like those from Juiced Link. And you can see the guys out there from B&H, and they'll tell you all about this. But the first rule is that you got to get the mic close, even if the sound is loud. So you get close. Whenever the situation allows, you get as close to the source of the sound as possible. I used to think this was a great affectation to have these big, long boom poles, but it turns out they're very, very necessary because there's no such thing as a telephoto mic. The shotgun will eliminate a little from what comes out of the side, but it won't suck it in. At least there's no such thing as a telephoto mic if you don't work for the NSA. I'm sure they have mics that are telephoto. If your mic is on the camera, get the camera as close to the sound that you want to record as possible. When you're recording an interview with a shotgun mic, this is not an ideal setup because the mic is going to pick up what's behind the subject. This is why we put it on a boom pole and we aim it down, so what's behind the subject is the floor, and it's not going to be making that much noise, we hope. So We use monitoring headphones. And this is something that I learned making my first instructional video for Nikon, unexpected background sounds. We were up on the roof of the hotel in Key West, and they had this very complicated move. I don't know, we were introducing the D90 camera or something, and I had to walk 3 places and say, the D90, it has this, that, and the other metering, blah, 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 blah. You're gonna love it, or something like that. And I did this whole walkthrough, not flawless, and the sound guy said, no, we got to do that over. We had a plane. And I was like, well, take the plane out. Take the plane out. I said, I'll never be able to do that walk and talk again. I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, you know? And the director pulled me over and he said, the audio guy, you got to listen to the audio guy. You can't tell him to take stuff out. You cannot fix the audio. So you will be so surprised at how unexpected sounds, refrigerators kicking on, motorcycles in the background. Here in New York City, you know, sirens and all this other stuff can ruin a good take on an interview. Wind blowing over the mic is a terrible sound. It's a terrible sound. You're awake now. That'll teach you to doze when Bob is speaking. No. When a microphone is in use, don't kick the tripod, don't tap the camera, don't use autofocus. You know, it hears it. Don't talk unless you're the subject. Switch off your mobile phones, refrigerators, air conditioning units, see if you can unplug them, and don't use manual or motor zooming on your camera because the mic will pick all this stuff up. And finally, you know, we're talking a lot about story. And, you know, you can do these impressionistic music videos of your travel like I just did there in Bhaktapur and you saw in my opening reel. But after a while, people need a story. Beautiful visuals and evocative music will hold attention for so long. For some pieces, there needs to be a story for your audience to follow. To engage your audience, find an engaging story. Whether it's a Hollywood movie or a 3-minute mini documentary for the web, stories have the same basic structure they have since man began telling tales around the campfire. And again, we know what this structure is because we've all watched a gazillion movies and television shows. And basically, it's find an appealing character or characters, take them on a journey, watch them overcome obstacles and conflict, and see how it changes them. Every story every movie that you go to, every television show, you know, Breaking Bad, you know, science teacher needs to all of a sudden finds out he's going to die, wants to provide for his family, but can't make enough money, so he goes into making drugs. You know, these are classic. This is Odysseus coming home, you know, after being away at war. These structures are baked into our consciousness of what makes a story. So when I am thinking about a potential story for shooting for one of my little web documentaries, I use what I call Sasha's Law. Bob Sasha is a dear friend. In fact, we're having dinner tonight, and he was my video guru, and he came up with a 5-step analysis to kind of decide if the subject that you think you want to shoot your video about has a story. So first thing, character. Is there a main character through whom the story can be told? Is he or she interesting and able to communicate the story? Are there supporting people who can help corroborate and support the main character? Story arc. Is there a process with a beginning, middle, and end? Does the character go through a change, overcome an obstacle, or resolve a conflict? Visual. Is there a process the characters are going through that's visible and visual? Can it be seen? So, you know, if you decide, you know what, I want to do a video about my meditation teacher. I make a sequence of this, I can't. But I want to do a video about my yoga teacher, and it's all about movement. And notice that yoga move? It's all about movement and everything. So you need something that's visual to start off with. Access. Will they allow you to witness their process? Can you physically get close enough to record the story? One of the things I most enjoyed about Susan's presentation was the way she shared her problems of access. You know, you see this beautiful church with all these great people with the great hats. You don't just walk up there and start shooting. You have to get in there. So do you have the access to it? And finally, time. Do you have enough time to witness and find the evolution of the process? So those are the 5 kind of things that I look for when I think I'm going to make a story. I kind of use that analysis. Can I get more or less those 5 elements. And you'd be surprised at how many subjects get weeded out that way. So another simple story structure, because basically we think on the web, a 3-minute video is War and Peace. It's got to be 3 minutes or less. So basically you open with your best mood or visual, you introduce your main character, you state the problem or the topic, you show your character going through a process. Does the process change or reveal something? And you wrap it up with a kicker or a visual reference. And this next movie is about a 5-minute movie. I did it for Reader's Digest. It's a story. The way we find stories, right? I'm an old newspaper photographer. I'm always reading newspapers. Whenever I go anyplace, I'm researching. And I was giving a talk to the Carolina Nature Photographers Association, and I was sitting at breakfast, and I saw this little bit on the bottom of page 1 said, 200-year-old country store to close due to Washington budget cuts. And then I started to read about this little country store where the post office was and how Congress wants to privatize the post office and they're going to close a lot of these less profitable places. And I said, that is a story of, the little man's struggle against the corporate forces and stuff. So I tracked these guys down. And I started pitching the story all over to almost every magazine editor. And finally, my friend Bill Black at Reader's Digest said, go ahead, take a crack at it. And so this is about 5 minutes about the little town in South Carolina and their struggles to keep this store that has been in the same family for 200 years. Can you imagine? That's almost as long as B&H has been in business, I think.
Our family's operated a country store here in Horatio for over 200 years, and the post office has been there since 1900. But unfortunately, we're facing the possibility of extinction due to budget cuts in Washington, D.C. I think we're the 7th generation to operate it. My father before me operated it, and that was his lifeblood. He didn't hunt or fish or have any hobbies, but he loved that country store.
The post office and the store is important to this community because it is a simple fact that it's our heritage.
This is an important networking tool, and with it gone, I don't know how people are going to stay in touch as often.
We see all our neighbors here and find out what they're doing, how the health is.
This is where we congregate sometimes, we talk, we enjoy each other. It's beautiful. We learn to love each other. We learn to communicate. We learn to trust.
Yeah, if you look at some of the old pictures in the showcases from days gone by, they used to come up here in a mule and wagon and hitch your mules out to the post outside. It's just some really neat pictures of customers we had in the past, and each unique person has a unique story.
We have a variety of people here, some who cannot read or write and who need help making out paperwork. You find that a lot of people in a rural community do not have bank accounts. So they want to work through the post office with their money orders.
I grew up in that store, walking on those wooden floors, barefoot as a little boy, and to me, it means everything. It's hard to describe, but it's just a feeling of community, a sense of community we have here.
Make no mistake about it, the Lenore store is not just another cutesy landmark. It's an integral part of my life, it's an integral part of the life of the community, and to lose it would be devastating.
If they close this post office, a lot of these people would lose their sense of communication with one another.
Think about an artery being blocked. If the post office leave here, that's an artery. It's being blocked. It may not kill us, but it's going to slow us down. It's going to make us sick. It's going to make us weak.
So the upshot of this was 50,000 Reader's Digest readers, because we did a still story, we did a print story and the video, wrote to Congress and stuff, and they spared this place, but they're only going to keep the post office open for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so they're looking for a postmaster who's willing to work for $14 an hour, $28 a day, 5 days a week. So if anybody needs a job in Horatio, unfortunately the place is struggling, but they're still open. The last I the last I heard. So you've identified your story. What do you do now? You avoid the total panic of being in the right situation without a clue of how to start. A simple formula to start you off: to do a short story about a place, identify 5 or more actions, and then shoot sequences of them. Very simple. So let's you're going to do something about your cousin's restaurant. So let's think of 5 things that they do in restaurants. People eat in restaurants, chefs cook, waiters take orders, they make menu recommendations, busboys clean up, people pay their bill. So if we take each of those situations and we shoot a 5-shot sequence, we've got a story. And your editor can probably make a story out of it. I've got about another 7 minutes. I'm going to show you one more. I know we said this was going to be about travel, and I did travel for this next piece. I traveled all the way from New Hope across the river to Lambertville, New Jersey. But I think it's important when we talk about travel, whether travel photography or travel video, that we think about shooting in our backyards too, because let's face it, not everybody can afford to get away to go halfway around the world to shoot Tibetan monks and stuff like that. Dan Westergren always used to say that, the people who can shoot stories about Tibet and monks in orange robes are a dime a dozen, but show me somebody who can make an interesting story of Kansas City, and that person will work, or some, nondescript. I'm sorry if I offended anybody from Kansas City. Dan Westergren did not say Kansas City. He said another Midwestern city. I realize that this is streaming now. The hate mail from Kansas City. Man, you thought Ferguson was bad? I'm in for it now. But let's say a nondescript city as opposed to Venice, okay? So one thing that I do, and I've done this my entire career as a still photographer and now as a videographer, is I shoot local stories. I've done a book about my backyard in Bucks County. I love to dig into what looks obvious and find the unusual. And I was driving down the street in Lambertville, New Jersey, across the bridge from me a couple years ago, and I saw, around Halloween, I saw this insane display of, it looked like Tim Robbins, who's the director that does that dark stuff? Yeah, that guy. It looked like it was his house or something like that. And I said, I gotta find out who does this and why he or she does. And I made a little video about it, and we'll have time to watch this, and we'll be right into our questions, and I think I'm going to finish on time. So here we go.
People often ask me, where do you get your ideas? And actually, a lot of them are people that I know. And they don't exactly look like the people, but the essence of that person is there in some caricature form. My name is Dolores Dragan, and I am happily living in Lambertville, New Jersey, where I guess I moved in about 20 years ago. When I first started working in Lambertville School, a teacher friend of mine and I decided to have a blacklight theater, which was a silent theater with movement, music, for children who had slight learning disabilities, who weren't able to memorize lines and often didn't get parts in plays, and they were the forever stagehands. From that play came the blacklight theme, and I began building blacklight figures. When I first started putting my figures out, I actually borrowed a skeleton from the nurse's office at school and carried it home and dressed it up as a bride and put it in the front window. And it was a huge hit. So then I began building them probably 15 years ago and keep adding. Each and every year I add about 4 or 5 new ones. I generally start my preparations during the summer, probably July, August, I give myself a break. It's quite an undertaking to build figures and then bring them out each year. As I'm getting older, it's getting a little harder, so I have probably 60-some odd figures, but I find my work time and my repair time is probably from July to October. Yep. Trial and error. Well, my neighbors really enjoy seeing my work, and they've offered their porches, their yards, so I can go on for years doing this because I have 2 or 3 blocks on either side that are willing to have me. However, the amount of candy in the neighborhood that we have to provide has gone up enormously, so economically, you might say that I've not been a good neighbor, but we spend at least $250 on candy per house. Well, the most we've ever heard was it's the Halloween house, and kind of everyone knows it, so we're the Halloween house. Actually, when I retired, I asked myself, now what am I? I think we all ask ourselves a question like that when you've become, supposedly, you step over the line and you're no longer in a job, and you can say I'm an architect or whatever. So I decided that I'm going to be a memory maker. So what I am doing, and I think it's so important because my father was a great storyteller, and I would like to donate memories every single year to children who come by here, something that they've never seen before, that they will never see again, and that they will talk about for the rest of their lives.
So these are the kind of eccentric characters that I'm drawn to. Everybody has a story. She wants to be a memory maker and stuff. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in video, because I want to tell these kind of stories, not only like art of fading cultures, but of also the interesting people, the unique people that we run across the block and across the world. So I will say thank you very much for your attention. I realize that's a lot of stuff thrown at you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.